Good afternoon. We apologize for the delay. It's so wonderful to see all of you here. I'm the Reverend Sadie Lansdale, and I'm the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Greensboro, which travels to many locations, including the Bicentennial Gardens here, and also folks are joining us on Zoom. It's my honor to welcome you to the simple service of remembrance for Nezih Divitci, whom we mostly called Nick. A brief note before we begin, please do keep your masks on. That's what we promised we would do when we sent the invitations, even though we are aware of updated guidance from the CDC. This is not a commentary on what the CDC has said. It's just we're following through on the commitment we made in the invitation. So we are going to remember Nick in the best way we know how, and we're going to do it while being cautious and keeping each other safe and feeling safe. It is good to be together. I bring you this afternoon the sympathy, prayers, and love of the entire congregation, most especially those who knew Nick for many years, and who remember fondly his dedication to institutions, his belief in human beings, and his friendliness. His time among us on the earth has ended, and yet death does not conquer love, nor end the relationships that sustain us, nor dampen the power of the human spirit. So in the spirit of memory, mourning, celebration, and hope, Nick's granddaughter Morgan will light our chalice this afternoon.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the world. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where his feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of a new day.
Thank you, Morgan. Nick's friend, the Reverend Jim Pravat, will give a reflection on Nick's life.
I first met Nick some 15 years ago when I began attending monthly meetings of the Men's Council of the Triad. It didn't take long to get to know Nick. He was a man who saw the injustices in the world, in this nation, this state, this region, this city. Nick saw these things, and he also believed deeply that he and we must do something about them. I well remember Nick talking about his move from Turkey to this country in order to study at Georgia Tech, a school my own father had attended in the 1920s. And Nick told us about an experience at Georgia Tech when President John Kennedy was assassinated. He said how horrified he was when many of the students began cheering when JFK's death was announced. Nick had not expected such hateful behavior in America, and he was saddened by it, of course. Nick had high and reasonable expectations of people. It's clear to me that his spirituality was not about dogma, doctrines, pretty words. He believed rather in the importance of behavior toward other folk and love and action, which was meant to bring about change for the better. And he was right about that, of course. So to me, Nick was an inspiration, an inspiration. One day I stopped by St. Barnabas Church where I attend and was surprised to see Nick there. Naturally, we talked. And Nick, it turns out, was deeply involved in developing the green natural cemetery in the woods behind the St. Barnabas Church. It's on Episcopal Church property, but since it's open to all people of all faiths or no faith, it's called All Souls Natural Burial Ground. Nick is buried there now. For me, it's an honor to speak to you today in this time of deep trouble in our country. Nick has shown us what it means to stand up for what you believe is righteous, even if that means confronting people unwilling to see the wrongs being done, even as we gather here to celebrate the life of this great man, Nick Divitci. May he rest in peace, and may our memories of Nick always remind us to be better and to do better. And finally, I want to read a poem. We often read poems at the Men's Council, and this is a favorite. It's called Wild Geese. It's by Mary Oliver, and I'm sure many of you know it. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I'll tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things.
Thank you, Jim. Nick had about 15 hymns marked in 2 hymnals in his house when we were planning his memorial service. And so I think that we've picked his favorites in our choir. Some members of our choir will now sing one of Nick's favorite hymns. Nick's dear friend Steve Cole, longtime member of the men's group, will tell us about Nick's life.
Good afternoon. Nick and Eric Eno, another very close friend, and I started a small men's group about 25 years ago. We met twice a month, and we eventually grew to, we stayed small, but we had about 8 or 9 members in the group, meeting most of the time at my house. We just talked about feelings and all of that. It had a very, very good time together, meaningful. And one of the memories that I have that's related to Nick and the group, Nick and I drove Eric Eno to visit his son in prison several times. It was about an hour and a half drive from Greensboro, and we had some very fine conversations along the way. We laughed a lot. Sometimes we cried. It was an ordeal. And since that time, Eric's son, Trevor, died in a traffic accident nearly a year ago. And one of the, in our most recent iteration, the group got smaller, and Nick and Fred Snyder and I would meet in Eric Eno's room or outside, oftentimes at Brookdale Senior Living. And it was a very meaningful time to all of us. That went on for quite a long time until Eric died about 2.5 years ago. And one of the things, and then during that same time, Nick and I wanted to continue sort of a men's group in a small forum. Just the two of us met every Thursday at Barnes and Noble coffee shop for maybe an hour or so and talked. And very meaningful time for me. And one of the most memorable things that came out of those sessions was Roger Ailes, who was the CEO of Fox News. On my way into Barnes and Noble, I heard it on the radio. I came in and I asked Nick if he had heard the news, and he said yes, and he kind of looked at me, and I said something crass, and Nick just stared at me, and without any harsh judgment or admonishment, he just said, Steve, he said, Roger was a human being too, just like us. And it's something that has stuck with me ever since. I'll never forget it. It had so much meaning. And as it turns out, Nick was the fourth member of our small men's group to die. Before him was Eric Eno, before him Jack Harrell, and before him Bob Wall. So I have an ache in my heart for all of them. I really miss them terribly. I love Nick. I always will.
Dave Dalton of the Progressive Caucus of the Guilford County Democratic Party, I'm pretty sure Nick would want me to mention, will offer some remarks on their behalf in Nick's honor.
Thank you, Sadie. The Guilford County Democratic Party and Convention represents about 350 precinct chairs, vice chairs, volunteers, a few dozen members of the state executive committee, elected officials, and at least 100,000 voters most times in the Guilford County. And in convention, the county executive committee adopted this resolution of tribute to Nick. Whereas Nick Divitci studied the issues and candidates, organized, canvassed door to door, made the phone calls, sent the emails, staked signs, donated, and attended the meetings. And whereas Nick held leadership positions within the Democratic Party at the precinct, county, congressional, and state levels. And whereas if you were a candidate, shared his values, and were willing to make the sacrifice, then Nick was there to support you. Therefore, be it resolved, the Guilford County Democratic Party in convention expresses its great appreciation for NV Nick Divitci's lifelong commitment to democratic values and service. Signed, Kathy Kirkpatrick, Chair. On a personal note, my friend Nick has meant a great deal to me. He's one of those few people who, by his example, made me want to be a better person. And if I asked, he'd help me be a better person. I'm going to miss and remember him forever. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Dave. Invite Nick's wife, Charlotte, to read a poem in his honor.
Thank you. With two of my favorite people helping me. This is a poem, When I'm Gone, by Mrs. Lyman Hancock. When I come to the end of my journey and I travel my last weary mile, just forget if you can I ever frowned and remember only the smile. Forget unkind words I've spoken, remember some good I have done. Forget that I ever had heartache and remember I had loads of fun. Forget that I've stumbled and blundered and sometimes fell by the way. Remember I've fought some hard battles and won ere the close of the day. Then forget to grieve for my going. I would not have you sad for a day. But in summer, just gather some flowers and remember the place where I lay. And come in the shade of the evening when the sun paints the sky in the west. Stand for a few moments beside me and remember only my best.
And now, Nick's dear friend, master of ceremonies at his burial service, sometime preacher at the UU's in Covenant, and our Zoom guy this morning, the Reverend Nelson Stover, also a man of many hats, will offer his reflection on Nick's life.
When I moved back to the United States from overseas and came to Greensboro in 1991, Nick was one of the first men who welcomed me into American culture, from which I'd been disconnected for over a decade. Nick was the kind of a guy you're glad to meet, a friend who meets you on your terms. He would share everything from practical advice to philosophical perspectives, and our frequent conversations covered all the ground from one end of the spectrum to the other. Nick was a man who figured out what he wanted, and he worked to bring his vision to fruition for himself, for his friends, and for the planet. Nick was a person who cared, not in an emotional way as much as in a practical, do something of a kind of a way. In his later years, when Nick realized that several of his friends were thinking about writing books, but couldn't quite figure out how to get them published, he figured it out and started a publishing company, which did my books and those of several others. He not only handled the printing and the legal aspects, but also prodded each of us in his own gentle way to get the writing done. He was a disciplined person, and he expected and encouraged his friends to be the same, and offered practical suggestions. When I told him I was setting aside 2 mornings a week for completing my book, he flatly told me that wasn't enough. It would take at least 3. Then he set an appointment a couple of weeks later for us to have morning coffee and ask for a progress report. Nick was involved in politics. Oh, that's an understatement. I would often meet him at various conventions and caucuses. Sometimes there would be an election taking place for this office or that position. If you asked Nick who to vote for, he always had a suggestion to share, along with good reasons for his selections. Usually he had met and interviewed the candidates all the way down the ballot and formed an opinion as to the best choice. I may not have always agreed with his suggestions, but I was always informed by his perspective. Finally, Nick used his life and death to accomplish the matters that he thought most important. While many people talked about caring for the environment, Nick took action. Knowing that everyone will die sometime, Nick sought ways to make his death as environmentally friendly as possible. For more than 2 decades, he worked to make green burials possible in Greensboro, not in a theoretical way, but very practically for himself and for his friends. Even in his final days, when he was unable to get out of bed, he guided many of us on the final steps in figuring out the practical, ecologically responsible details so that his body would nurture the earth and do no harm. Nick lived his life to make a difference in the course of history, and he encouraged others to do the same. Many of us here today have our work cut out for us. We are working to continue to move down the pathways that Nick opened for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Nelson. At Nick's burial at the All Souls Natural Burial Ground, I read these words. In death, the body returns to the earth and becomes one once again with the source and sustenance of all life. So we return Nick to the earth in accordance with his wishes, and we bury him simply, in harmony with the natural world, so that his body might nourish the soil and do it no harm. We hasten to bury his body soon after the time of his death, obeying not the laws of our own calendars or convenience, but the laws of nature and decay. We bow to the natural order of things. We are humbled by the mystery among us and beyond us as we say goodbye to our beloved Nick. I'm sharing that with you today because, as Nelson has said, Nick's passion for natural burial animated even his final days. Some of our deathbed conversations felt like committee meetings of 2. He was adamant that the occasion of his death be used to educate the wider population of Greensboro about natural burial, and so I'm doing my part in honoring his wishes. He wants to encourage you to research it and to consider it as an option for yourselves as you consider your own mortality. Nick channeled his life force into making the world around him better, into building and strengthening institutions, into growing deep and nurturing friendships and relationships, into applying strategy and diligence and sheer force of will to unleash the power of organized people with a dream and a goal and a plan. He wanted his death to be useful, just as he wanted his body to return to the earth for nourishment for that which grows. He was insistent that the occasion of his death be instruction, be compost, make the way smoother for others to line up their actions and their values at a cellular level. You can clap for Nick. In a conversation about what Nick believed with Nelson and Charlotte, we were pondering. We were like, I don't know that any of us could really very well describe exactly his spirituality, especially not with 2 preachers trying to come up with what theological terms would we use precisely to pin down Nick. And Charlotte said he never said it to her. So I'll take a chance And I would describe him this way. Nick was the very best of the old humanists, and he exemplified his faith in humanity, not by talking about faith at all, but by getting to work. So perhaps he would appreciate remarks about how, at a cellular level, he lined up his values and his blah, 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 all that stuff I just said. But I think what he would appreciate more is if all of you went ahead and thought about it for yourselves and let him know. And so in your own ways, when you consider your own plans and your own lives, however Nick's story informs yours. The way to pay him tribute is not necessarily to do exactly what he said, but to thoughtfully consider his passion and his reasoning, to allow someone who lived full of such purpose to animate your purpose. We also decided we might describe Nick kind of as a Sufi mystic. He grew up in Turkey. He was not particularly religious growing up, nor were his parents, but he's culturally Muslim. And again, he's sort of he was a practical mystic, maybe you would say. I see Charlotte nodding. He his way of relating to the mystery of the universe was to get things done, was to make a project out of lining up ever closer and ever closer his values and his actions. I think that was of tremendous spiritual import to him. He wanted to live in the way that he believed. A few years ago, Nick took me out to lunch and he said, "Sadie, I'm old, I have cancer, I don't have much time, and I have some opinions I'd like to share with you." And his generosity in sharing these carefully considered opinions about the church, about the future of the church, about the way that we could reach out to people. I mean, he offered in such a clearly thought through and gentle way, and it was just so obvious to me that the urge to do this came from the depth of his caring. He was an institution builder, really above all, and he has built things that outlast him, which we've heard today. So as you allow your memories of Nick and the memories that we have shared today to inform your living, take this with you. Use his example to pursue harmony between what you believe and how you behave in your own life, in the life of your family, your immediate community, and in all the world. And in doing so, if you're a Unitarian Universalist, you'll live your faith. And if you're not, you'll honor Nick's life and the legacy that he has left for all of us. May it be so for you and so for us all. Amen.
Blue boat.
Lowly, lowly, I feel no ocean, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean. Still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. souls, making a way like the light of the heavens in a beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the winds upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on. Read the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born above the fathom, never heard or heard have I known. The universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home.
Thank you, choir. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. As we leave this place and this time together, go strengthened in story and in song, to live inspired by Nick's example, pursuing harmony between your values and your actions on this day and all the days to come. Go in peace.
I'm going to, I'll pan the camera around to, I'll pan the camera around to the crowd. And I'll also let Charlotte know that if any of you want to say something to her, we'll see if we can make that work. So that's what I'm going to do. Otherwise, leave when you want or whatever. I think I can hear you if you speak.
Thank you, Nelson.
I don't know if you can hear me, Nelson, but this is Maurice. I want to thank you for setting this up. What a beautiful service. And as Susan said, very inspirational. Thank you.
Oh, well, somebody talk to him.
Does anybody really want me to try to get a hold of Charlotte? Okay, I'm going to end the recording.